The cold CEO received my flirty text by mistake, then showed up at my door. Gay love story. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin today's story, we have one small favor to ask. If you enjoy heartfelt, emotional, and unforgettable romance stories, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It only takes a second. It is completely free, and your support helps us continue creating more dramatic and inspiring stories just like this one. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Before we get started, let us know where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments below because we would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let us return to our main character. Sometimes the smallest mistake becomes the beginning of the greatest blessing you never dared to imagine. My name is Owen Carter, and if you had told me that one careless text message would completely change the direction of my life, I would have laughed, apologized for whatever misunderstanding had happened, and gone right back to finishing my morning coffee. At 26 years old, I lived a quiet life on the north side of Chicago. My apartment was small enough that I could reach almost everything without taking more than a few steps. But it was comfortable, filled with books, movie posters, and a stubborn little houseplant that somehow refused to die despite my terrible gardening skills. I worked as a copywriter at Whitmore Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing companies in the city. It was the kind of place where creativity mattered, deadlines arrived faster than expected, and everyone lowered their voices whenever the chief executive officer walked past. Adrian Whitmore was a legend inside the building. Some employees admired his intelligence, others respected his discipline, but almost everyone agreed on one thing. He was impossible to read. Calm, professional, reserved. Nobody had ever seen him lose his temper, but nobody had ever seen him truly relax either. He always seemed surrounded by an invisible wall that kept the rest of the world at a polite distance. Fortunately, I had never needed to speak with him directly. My department stayed busy creating marketing campaigns while executives handled decisions several floors above us. I preferred it that way. My own life already contained enough drama after ending a relationship that had lasted nearly 2 years. According to my former boyfriend, I smiled too often, trusted people too easily, and believed kindness could solve almost anything. Maybe he was right. Even after the breakup, I still found reasons to laugh. My best friend Mason made sure of that. Every morning he sent me ridiculous messages before work, determined to keep me from taking life too seriously. That Tuesday started exactly the same way. While standing in the crowded company lobby with a fresh cup of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, I received another message from Mason. He had sent a picture of an incredibly handsome actor wearing an expensive designer suit with the caption, "Tell me your heart is finally ready to appreciate beautiful men again." I laughed so unexpectedly that a woman waiting for the elevator glanced over her shoulder at me. Without thinking, I typed the first playful response that came into my mind. "If you keep looking this handsome, I am going to kiss you." I pressed send while reaching for my employee identification badge. For seconds later, my entire world stopped. Something felt wrong. I opened the conversation again, expecting another joke from Mason. Instead, I found myself staring at a name that instantly drained every drop of color from my face. Adrian Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer. My message had gone to him instead. My fingers moved so quickly that I nearly dropped my phone trying to remove the text before anyone could read it. I was too late. A single word appeared beneath the message. Seen. My heartbeat became so loud that I barely heard the elevator doors opening beside me. Every terrible possibility rushed through my imagination at once. Human resources calling me upstairs. My manager explaining why professionalism mattered. Security politely escorting me out of the building with a cardboard box full of office supplies. Somehow I survived. The rest of the workday without seeing Adrian even once. The silence felt worse than any confrontation I could imagine. By the time I returned home that evening, I had convinced myself that tomorrow would almost certainly be my last day at Whitmore Dynamics. I changed into a comfortable sweater, heated a bowl of tomato soup, and tried distracting myself with an old comedy movie that I had already watched at least 5 times. Just as I finally started relaxing, 3 slow, Steady knocks echoed through my apartment. Nobody ever visited me without sending a message first. Curious, I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and slowly pulled it open. Standing beneath the warm hallway light, perfectly composed in a tailored charcoal overcoat despite the cool Chicago evening, was Adrian Whitmore. His calm gray-blue eyes met mine, and after a brief silence that seemed to last forever, he spoke with complete composure. "Good evening, Owen. I was hoping we could talk about the message you sent this morning." For a few endless seconds, I completely forgot how to breathe. Adrian Whitmore stood quietly outside my apartment as though visiting an employee after work was the most ordinary thing in the world. Meanwhile, I was seriously considering whether pretending to faint would somehow make the situation less embarrassing. Instead, I stepped aside and awkwardly gestured toward the living room. "Please come in." Adrian thanked me with a polite nod before entering. He looked around with quiet curiosity, noticing the overflowing bookshelf against the wall, the movie posters that had followed me through 3 different apartments, the lonely little houseplant stretching toward the window, and the bowl of tomato soup still sitting untouched on the coffee table. His expression never suggested judgment. If anything, he seemed interested in seeing the ordinary life that existed outside the office. I closed the door and immediately blurted out the apology I had rehearsed in my head all day. "I am so sorry about the message. It was never meant for you. My best friend sent me a joke," and I answered without checking who I was replying to. I realized what happened almost immediately, but you had already seen it. Adrian listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, he folded his hands calmly in front of him and spoke in the same measured voice everyone recognized from company meetings. I assumed that was probably the explanation. I stared at him, completely confused. "You did." He gave a small nod. "Yes, but assumptions have caused enough misunderstandings in my life. I believed it would be better to hear the truth directly from you rather than create a story inside my own head." His answer surprised me more than his visit. Throughout the entire day, I had imagined every possible outcome except kindness. I laughed nervously, rubbing the back of my neck. I spent 8 hours preparing myself to lose my job. For the first time since arriving, the corners of Adrian's mouth lifted into a small, genuine smile. It completely changed his face, making him appear younger and far less intimidating than the man everyone whispered about at work. "That possibility never crossed my mind," he replied. Relief swept through me so quickly that I nearly laughed again. "Thank you," I said honestly. Most people would have decided I was unprofessional before even giving me a chance to explain. Adrian glanced briefly toward the window where the lights of Chicago shimmered against the dark evening sky. People often become too comfortable believing the first version of a story they hear. There was something unexpectedly personal hidden beneath those words, as though they came from experience instead of philosophy. The apartment settled into a comfortable silence. It was not awkward, felt strangely peaceful. Then Adrian reached into the pocket of his overcoat and removed a folded sheet of paper. "Your department meeting tomorrow has been moved to 9 o'clock. Your manager asked that everyone be informed, but I noticed the updated schedule had not reached you." I accepted the paper with complete disbelief. "You personally brought me tomorrow's meeting schedule?" Adrian answered without hesitation. Since I was already coming here, it seemed practical. I could not stop smiling. Nobody at the office would ever believe this. Conversation. He raised one eyebrow slightly. "Perhaps it is better that way." We both laughed quietly, and for a brief moment the invisible distance created by job titles disappeared completely. As Adrian prepared to leave, he paused beside the apartment door and looked back toward me. "For what it is worth, Owen," he said softly, "I never found your message offensive." I blinked. "You did not." He gently shook his head. "No." "Unexpected, certainly. Embarrassing for you, probably, but not offensive." I smiled with genuine relief. "I appreciate hearing that more than you probably realize." Adrian opened the door, then hesitated for one final moment. "Tomorrow, forget about today. Come to work exactly as you always do." After he disappeared down the hallway, I remained standing in the middle of my apartment holding tomorrow's meeting schedule and wondering how the coldest man in the company had somehow become the first person in a very long time to remind me that listening before judging was one of the greatest acts of kindness anyone could offer. The following morning, I stepped into Whitmore Dynamics determined to pretend that nothing unusual had happened. The familiar scent of fresh coffee drifted through the lobby. Employees hurried toward elevators with laptops tucked beneath their arms, and the giant glass walls reflected another bright Chicago sunrise. On the surface, everything looked exactly the same. Inside my head, however, I kept replaying the previous evening over and over again. Adrian Whitmore had not only listened to my explanation, he had treated me with a level of respect I had never expected. I reached my desk, greeted my coworkers as usual, and buried myself in campaign drafts, hoping the embarrassment would eventually fade. Around 9 o'clock, our creative department gathered inside the main conference room for the revised project meeting. My manager introduced the agenda while everyone opened laptops and organized notebooks across the long table. A few minutes later, the conference room door opened quietly. Adrian walked inside carrying only a slim leather notebook. The room immediately became silent. Every conversation stopped and several people instinctively straightened their posture. Adrian greeted everyone with a polite nod before taking a seat near the far end of the table. He listened carefully while different team members presented ideas for the company's upcoming national marketing campaign. When the final presentation finished, he remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before closing his notebook. "Before we make any decisions," he said calmly, "I would like to hear the original concept from the person who first suggested this direction." My manager looked toward me with a surprised smile. "That would be Owen." I felt every pair of eyes turn in my direction. For one brief moment, I considered pretending to search for something inside my bag simply to delay standing up. Instead, I took a slow breath and walked toward the presentation screen. My voice felt slightly uncertain at first, but as I explained the campaign's central message, I gradually forgot about my nervousness. I spoke about authenticity, about telling stories that focused on real employees instead of polished corporate slogans, and about building trust through honesty rather than perfection. Adrian listened without interrupting once. Whenever he asked a question, it encouraged me to explain my reasoning instead of defending it. By the time I finished, the room had become completely quiet. Adrian looked around the table before speaking. "Keep Owen's original direction. Develop the campaign from that foundation." Several managers immediately began making notes while a few coworkers exchanged surprised glances. As everyone filed out of the meeting, people stopped to congratulate me. One colleague joked that I had somehow figured out exactly how the chief executive officer thought. Another asked whether I had secretly joined a leadership development program. I smiled politely without offering any explanation because the truth sounded too unbelievable to repeat. Throughout the afternoon, I noticed small changes that were impossible to ignore. Adrian greeted me by name when passing through the hallway. During another discussion, he paused specifically to ask whether I had additional thoughts before the meeting ended. None of it felt inappropriate or excessive. He simply treated my ideas with the same attention he gave everyone else's, yet because he had rarely done that with junior employees before, the office noticed every interaction. Quiet whispers followed me through the open workspace, stopping whenever I walked nearby. Instead of letting the rumors bother me, I remembered something Adrian had said inside my apartment. People often believed the first version of a story they heard. Standing beside the office windows as the afternoon sunlight reflected across downtown Chicago, I quietly promised myself that no matter what assumptions surrounded us, I would judge the man only by the kindness and integrity I had already seen with my own eyes. Over the following weeks, life at Whitmore Dynamics gradually settled into a new rhythm, although the quiet whispers around the office never completely disappeared. Every time Adrian asked for my opinion during a meeting or greeted me by name in the hallway, someone noticed. Every small interaction seemed to become another piece of office gossip. At first, I found it uncomfortable, but eventually I realized something that mattered far more. Adrian never treated me differently depending on who happened to be watching. He was consistently respectful, equally attentive to every thoughtful idea, and completely uninterested in playing favorites. That quiet consistency slowly earned my admiration. One Thursday evening, an important client requested extensive revisions to a campaign only hours before a major presentation. Nearly every department stayed late to finish the work. By the time we completed the final draft, most of the building had become silent. The bright office lights still glowed above empty desks, while the distant sound of elevators echoed through nearly deserted hallways. I packed my laptop into my backpack and suddenly remembered that I had left my notebook inside the executive conference room earlier that afternoon. Muttering to myself about my increasingly forgetful memory, I rode the elevator to the top floor. The executive level felt completely different after business hours. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of lights across downtown Chicago, polished hallways stretched quietly in every direction, and nearly every office stood dark except one. A warm light still shined beneath Adrian's office door. I quietly retrieved my notebook from the conference room and intended to leave without disturbing anyone. As I walked past his office, however, I accidentally glanced through the partially open doorway. Adrian was not sitting behind his impressive executive desk. Instead, he sat alone at the long conference table wearing a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. His tailored suit jacket rested over the back of a nearby chair, and an unopened container of takeout food sat beside his laptop. He was not reading reports or answering emails. He simply stared out through the enormous windows toward the sparkling city below with the thoughtful expression of someone carrying responsibilities that could not easily be shared. In that quiet moment, the powerful chief executive officer no longer looked intimidating. He simply looked lonely. I immediately turned away, hoping he had not noticed me, but the sole of my shoe squeaked softly against the polished floor. Adrian lifted his head and looked toward the doorway. "Working late?" he asked calmly. I held up my notebook with an embarrassed smile. "I forgot this after the meeting." He nodded once. "You are not the first person to leave something behind after a long day." I laughed quietly. "That somehow makes me feel better." Just as I prepared to leave, my stomach let out a very loud growl that echoed through the otherwise silent hallway. I closed my eyes in complete embarrassment. Adrian glanced toward the untouched dinner beside him before looking back at me. "It appears neither of us has eaten." I smiled awkwardly. "Apparently not." Without hesitation, he stood, picked up the extra container from the table, and placed it in front of me. "I ordered more than I needed. Please help me solve that problem." I hesitated for a moment before accepting. A few minutes later, we sat across from one another sharing a simple dinner while the lights of Chicago shimmered beyond the windows. We spoke about favorite books, neighborhood restaurants, childhood memories, weekend hiking trails, and the places that made the city feel like home. There was no discussion about profits, board meetings, or corporate strategy. Adrian listened carefully every time I spoke, asking thoughtful questions with genuine curiosity instead of polite obligation. Walking back toward the elevator later that evening, I realized something I had never fully understood before. Success could fill a building with awards, recognition, and impressive titles, but none of those things could replace the quiet comfort of sharing an ordinary meal with someone willing to truly listen. Life has a quiet way of revealing a person's true character when circumstances become difficult. Only a few weeks after that unexpected dinner in Adrian's office, Whitmore Dynamics found itself facing a challenge that no one had anticipated. I noticed the change the moment I stepped through the lobby doors on Monday morning. Instead of chatting over coffee, employees stood silently watching the large television mounted near the reception desk. Business news channels were reporting that an anonymous online article questioned the company's financial transparency and criticized Adrian's leadership. Within hours, the story had spread across social media, financial blogs, and local news websites. Nobody knew where the accusations had come from, but uncertainty traveled much faster than facts. Throughout the office, conversations became quieter. Some employees openly wondered whether they should begin looking for new jobs. Others avoided discussing the situation altogether, hoping silence would somehow protect them from whatever happened next. Our creative department received instructions to pause every advertising campaign until further notice while leadership focused entirely on responding to the growing public attention. That afternoon, while delivering revised marketing materials to the executive floor, I passed one of the boardrooms and noticed Adrian standing before the company's directors. Through the glass walls, I could not hear their discussion, but I could clearly see the pressure resting on his shoulders. Questions arrived, one after another, yet Adrian answered every one of them with the same calm professionalism I had come to admire. He never appeared angry. He never blamed anyone else. Even from across the hallway, I could recognize something different in his expression. It was not fear. It was the quiet exhaustion of someone carrying responsibility for thousands of employees while the world outside questioned every decision he made. Later that evening, long after most people had gone home, I remained at my desk reviewing unfinished campaign concepts that suddenly felt far less important than they had only a week earlier. As I packed my laptop, I noticed Adrian walking slowly through the nearly empty office. His tie had been loosened after what was obviously another endless day of meetings. When he saw me, he stopped with a polite smile. "You are still here," he said. I smiled back. "I could probably say the same thing about you." For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "Have you had dinner yet?" Adrian gave a small shake of his head. "Not today." Without thinking twice, I opened my backpack and pulled out the turkey sandwich I had packed that morning but never had time to eat. "It is not particularly exciting," I admitted, "but it is better than working on an empty stomach." Adrian looked at the sandwich before meeting my eyes. "That was supposed to be your dinner." I shrugged with a quiet laugh. "Tomorrow's lunch can worry about tomorrow." After a short hesitation, he accepted it. "Thank you, Owen." We stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago while he ate a few bites in comfortable silence. After several minutes, Adrian quietly said, "Many people have already begun distancing themselves from me." His voice contained no bitterness, only acceptance. I understood exactly what he meant. Difficult moments often revealed who remained when convenience disappeared. I folded my arms and looked out across the glowing city lights before answering honestly. "Maybe some people will leave. I cannot make that decision for them. But I have already seen who you are when nobody else is watching, and I trust that more than headlines written by strangers." Adrian looked toward me with genuine surprise before a grateful smile slowly appeared across his face. In that quiet moment, surrounded by nothing more than city lights and an ordinary sandwich, I realized that loyalty is not proven when life is easy. It is revealed when standing beside someone becomes the more difficult choice. The following 2 weeks slowly restored a sense of calm to Whitmore Dynamics. Independent auditors completed their review, confirming that the accusations spreading online had been built on misleading information instead of facts. News outlets began correcting earlier reports. Investors regained confidence, and the uncertainty that had filled every hallway gradually disappeared. Yet what stayed with me was not the recovery itself. It was watching Adrian remain steady through every difficult conversation without ever allowing frustration to replace integrity. He never searched for someone to blame, never spoke with bitterness, and never forgot that thousands of employees were depending on his decisions. That quiet strength changed the way I looked at leadership forever. Soon afterward, the executive team organized a strategy meeting to discuss how the company could rebuild public trust. To my complete surprise, my manager informed me that Adrian had personally requested my attendance. Walking into a boardroom filled with directors and senior executives felt surreal, but Adrian greeted me with the same calm nod he always offered. After everyone had presented their recommendations, he turned toward me. "Owen," he said, "you once suggested that people trust honest stories more than polished slogans. If you still believe that, I would like to hear your thoughts." Every eye in the room shifted toward me. I took a slow breath before standing. "I think we stop trying to convince people that we never make mistakes," I said. "Instead, we show them who we really are. We tell the stories of our employees, the communities we serve, and the values we practice every day. People rarely trust perfection, but they remember sincerity." Silence filled the room for several thoughtful seconds. Adrian looked around the table before speaking with quiet confidence. "That will become our direction." During the following month, our creative department worked harder than ever before. We interviewed employees from every division, highlighted volunteer programs throughout Chicago, visited community organizations supported by the company, and built an entire campaign centered on authentic human experiences instead of corporate promises. When the campaign finally launched, the public response exceeded everyone's expectations. Customers praised the honesty of the message, local organizations shared their own positive experiences working with Whitmore Dynamics, and gradually the conversation surrounding the company changed from doubt to respect. One cool autumn evening after another successful day, Adrian invited me to take a short walk before heading home. We followed the Chicago River while the city lights shimmered across the water and the crisp evening air carried the first hints of approaching winter. For several peaceful minutes, we simply walked side by side without speaking. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. "There is something I should have told you long ago." I looked at him curiously. He smiled with quiet warmth. "The evening you sent that message, I knew almost immediately that it had not been intended for me." I laughed softly. "I suspected you probably figured that out." He nodded. "I did. But something unexpected happened after I read it." He paused briefly before continuing. "It was the first completely genuine compliment anyone had given me in years. Most people spoke to my position. Very few spoke to me as a person." I stopped walking and looked at him with quiet surprise. Adrian met my eyes before glancing toward the river again. "I told myself I came to your apartment simply to avoid a misunderstanding," he admitted. "The truth is that I wanted to meet the person whose kindness had reached me without even realizing it. Your message was sent by accident, but your sincerity was real. Sometimes the smallest moments reveal the kind of person someone truly is. And that evening I realized I wanted to know the man behind that unexpected message far better than I ever expected." Adrian's words stayed with me long after we reached the parking garage that evening. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago, I realized that the message I had spent weeks wishing I could erase had become one of the most meaningful moments in both of our lives. It reminded me that sincerity often reaches people in ways we never expect. Over the next several weeks, Whitmore Dynamics continued moving forward with renewed confidence. The campaign, built around real employees and genuine community stories, received praise from customers, business leaders, and local organizations alike. More importantly, something inside the company had changed. Departments that once worked in isolation began collaborating more naturally. Managers spent more time listening than speaking. Employees who had once been afraid to share ideas now participated with confidence. Adrian's leadership had not become softer. It had become more human. One Friday afternoon, just as I finished reviewing a new advertising proposal, an unfamiliar email appeared in my inbox. A prestigious marketing agency in Seattle invited me to interview for a senior creative position. The salary was considerably higher than my current income, the benefits were exceptional, and the opportunity represented exactly the kind of career advancement most people hoped for. Mason called me the moment I forwarded him the message. "Owen, this is incredible," he said excitedly. "You have to take this seriously. People wait years for offers like this." I understood exactly what he meant. Only a few months earlier, I probably would have accepted the interview without hesitation. Yet instead of excitement, I felt strangely conflicted. That evening I remained at my desk long after everyone else had gone home, quietly reading the email again and again. Adrian happened to walk past my office while leaving another meeting. He noticed the thoughtful expression on my face and stopped. "Everything all right?" he asked. I turned the monitor toward him. "I received another job offer today." Adrian carefully read the message before looking back at me. His expression remained calm, although I noticed a brief flicker of disappointment that disappeared. Almost immediately, "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "That is an outstanding opportunity. They would be fortunate to have someone with your creativity." I smiled faintly. "That is generous of you." Adrian gently folded his hands. "Whatever decision you make, I hope it is based on the future you truly want rather than the expectations of anyone else, including mine." There was no attempt to persuade me to stay. No reminder about unfinished projects. No promise of promotions or higher pay. He simply respected my freedom to choose. Somehow that quiet trust made the decision even more difficult. During the weekend, I visited my parents in the suburbs, helped my father repair a weathered fence, and talked with my mother while we baked her famous apple pie. After listening patiently, she smiled and said, "A successful career matters, Owen, but never forget to ask where you are becoming the person you hope to be." Her words stayed with me throughout Sunday evening. On Monday morning, I walked into Whitmore Dynamics carrying complete certainty. I politely declined the interview, thanked the agency for their confidence, and returned to work. Around lunchtime, I knocked gently on Adrian's office door. He invited me inside with a warm smile. "I wanted you to know that I made my decision," I said. Adrian looked at me quietly, and I smiled with confidence. "I chose to stay, not because you are the chief executive officer, and not because leaving frightened me. I am staying because this company has become a place where people genuinely care about one another, and I want to help build something that matters." Adrian slowly stood and extended his hand. As we shook hands, genuine gratitude appeared in his eyes. "Then I am grateful our journey is not ending here." Walking back toward my office, I realized that the greatest opportunities are not always the ones offering the highest salary. Sometimes they are the ones allowing us to become the kind of person we are proud to see in the mirror every morning. The months that followed passed with a quiet sense of purpose neither of us could have imagined when everything began with one mistaken message. Whitmore Dynamics no longer felt like a company divided by titles and closed office doors. The atmosphere throughout the building had gradually changed. Departments shared ideas more openly, employees laughed together during lunch breaks, and meetings that once felt intimidating became conversations where every voice carried value. The communication campaign had inspired more than public confidence. It had quietly transformed the culture inside the company itself. Adrian changed in ways that many people noticed but few could explain. The office door that had once remained closed throughout the day now stayed open unless complete privacy was necessary. He regularly walked through different departments simply to ask how projects were progressing instead of waiting for formal reports. He remembered birthdays, congratulated employees personally after important achievements, and listened with genuine patience whenever someone offered a thoughtful suggestion. Watching those small changes reminded me that real leadership was not about speaking the loudest. It was about helping other people feel heard. One Saturday morning, the company organized another volunteer event, this time helping restore a neighborhood community garden on the south side of Chicago. Dozens of employees arrived wearing comfortable clothes instead of business suits, carrying gardening tools, gloves, and boxes of flowers donated by local businesses. I smiled when I saw Adrian walking toward us in blue jeans, sturdy work boots, and a simple navy sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. Several co-workers exchanged amused looks because none of us had ever imagined the chief executive officer arriving with a shovel balanced over one shoulder. Throughout the morning we planted flowers, built raised garden beds, spread fresh soil, and worked alongside local families who welcomed us with warm smiles. Adrian spent nearly 20 minutes listening to an elderly volunteer explain the proper way to support young tomato plants with wooden stakes. He listened as attentively as he would have during a board meeting, thanking her sincerely before following every instruction with surprising care. Seeing him in that ordinary moment made me realize how completely my first impression of him had changed. The distant executive I had once feared had quietly become someone whose kindness appeared most clearly when nobody expected it. Later that afternoon, after most volunteers had returned home, Adrian and I stayed behind to finish watering the newly planted flowers. The garden felt peaceful beneath the warm autumn sunlight while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers through the air. Adrian rested one hand against the wooden fence surrounding the garden and looked across the colorful rows we had spent the day creating together. "For a long time," he said thoughtfully, "I believed leadership meant carrying every burden alone because asking for help would make people lose confidence. I set the watering can beside a flower bed and smiled gently. And what do you believe now?" He looked toward me with quiet warmth. "I think people trust leaders more when they see that they are human. No one succeeds completely alone." His answer lingered in the peaceful silence between us. We slowly walked toward the garden entrance together, neither of us feeling any need to rush the conversation. Somewhere between shared meals, honest discussions, difficult challenges, and ordinary afternoons like this one, the distance that had once separated us had disappeared completely. We had become two people who encouraged one another to grow into better versions of ourselves. Looking back across the blooming garden, I realized relationships are remarkably similar to flowers. They cannot be forced into existence overnight. They need patience, honesty, kindness, and consistent care. Given enough time, even the most unexpected beginning can quietly grow into something beautiful enough to change two lives forever. Almost exactly 1 year after the evening that changed everything, I stood on the rooftop garden above Whitmore Dynamics watching the sun slowly disappear behind the Chicago skyline. Golden light reflected across the glass buildings, while a gentle breeze carried the familiar sounds of the city high above the streets below. The rooftop had become one of my favorite places because it reminded me how quietly life could transform. Looking across the rows of flowers planted during employee volunteer projects, I thought about the frightened copywriter who had once believed a single mistaken message would destroy his career. That version of me felt impossibly distant now. Whitmore Dynamics had grown into a different company as well. Employees greeted one another with genuine warmth, departments worked together naturally, and every month our volunteer programs continued bringing people together outside the office. Adrian often said that businesses became stronger when people felt valued instead of managed, and every ordinary day proved those words were no longer simply an idea. They had become part of the company's identity. I heard the rooftop door open and turned to see Adrian walking toward me after another successful day. His business jacket rested comfortably over one shoulder, and the reserved expression that had once defined him had been replaced by a calm confidence that felt welcoming instead of distant. He stopped beside me and admired the skyline for a quiet moment. "Beautiful evening," he said. I smiled. "It feels like the right place to remember where everything started." Adrian glanced toward me with curious eyes. Without saying anything else, I unlocked my phone and opened the old conversation that had remained untouched for an entire year. The original message still sat there, preserved exactly as it had appeared that unforgettable morning. This time I smiled instead of panicking. I copied the sentence, carefully checked the conversation twice, and pressed send. Adrian's phone vibrated softly. He looked down, read the message, and laughed with genuine happiness. "If you keep looking this handsome, I am going to kiss you." He slowly lifted his eyes to meet mine. "I am relieved you sent that to the correct person this time." I laughed with him. I learned my lesson. Adrian slipped his phone into his pocket before taking one relaxed step closer. "Good," he replied, "because I have been hoping to hear those words again." For a brief moment neither of us spoke. We simply stood together beneath the warm colors of the evening sky, grateful for the quiet journey that had brought us there. Then Adrian smiled with the same gentle sincerity that had first appeared outside my apartment 1 year earlier. "Next time," he said softly, "you do not need to send a message." I tilted my head with playful curiosity. What should I do instead? His smile grew warmer. "Tell me in person." I reached for his hand, and he welcomed mine without hesitation. We shared a quiet, heartfelt kiss beneath the fading sunset, a simple expression of trust, gratitude, and the deep affection that had grown one honest conversation at a time. Looking back now, I understand that our story was never really about a mistaken text message. It was about choosing understanding instead of assumptions, kindness instead of judgment, and courage instead of fear. A single accident opened the first door, but patience, honesty, respect, and compassion carried us through every door that followed. If there is one lesson I hope anyone listening remembers, it is this: never underestimate the power of one sincere moment, because the smallest act of kindness may quietly become the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of your entire life.